Okay, welcome everyone to the October session of Dr. Spotfire. My name's Neil Kanungo. I'll be your host, and we have Nanad Sawe, who is co-hosting with us today. And today we're going to be doing a session on data prep tips and tricks using the Spotfire Data Canvas. We had a previous session last year on the overview of the data canvas, and today we're going to start peeling the onion a little bit more and start showing some intermediate and advanced tips. I'm going to first start by just talking about the different elements of the data canvas. There's some little things I've noticed with new users that may not realize some details on the canvas. So the first thing I want to talk about is this whole canvas is creating what's called your Spotfire data table. So this over here is what's actually exposed to the rest of your DXP, your visualizations, your data functions. This is the final node. This is the data table. Now, this is the data source. These are all data sources that go into the workflow. When you hit replace up here or delete, this is going to act on the whole table. So replace, if you just want to replace this, but you hit this button, it's actually going to wipe out everything because you're telling it to replace, again, the whole data table. If you just want to replace or rename or delete or work with a certain source here, you should click that node and then you can actually replace the data source. So that's my first tip. Look at the node that you're operating on when you're doing these replaces and edits. The other thing is you have these nodes. You can start adding rows, add columns, add transformations. When you add this here, it'll apply it to this previous node. So you'll see, if I applied something here, it would apply to this node. You can also go directly into the node by clicking the node, and you'll see all of these kind of groupings here, and you have the ability to add different transformations up and down throughout this workflow. You'll notice that there's different groups here. And a little known fact is that these groups do matter. These groups are different transformations, operations that are being done on your data. And what Spotfire is going to try to do is consolidate all of the transforms that are in one group all at once, which saves memory. So if you put all of your transformations, if I put all of these here in one single group, it would actually save memory and it would perform faster. Now, the advantage of having different groups is that you can actually preview the data as you're making different changes. So, if let's see, yeah. So here, as I'm going through, and this is also highlighting different changes and stuff that I'm making, this allows me to preview them step by step. So I choose to try to think logically about what I'm doing. One thing I have here, I try to think logically about what I'm doing, group it accordingly. So, one thing I have is I needed to rename a lot of different provinces in this data set for Spain. And I also need to do one for India. So rather than doing these all separate, this was kind of like my renaming block. And I put that in here. And you'll see that I have this double / here. Well, in Spotfire 1010, comments were introduced to expressions. So you can actually place those into your expressions at wherever you'd like. And that will allow you to kind of document what's happening. And this helps with reproducibility when you're handing off to, and maintainability when you're handing off to other people in your organizations. Now, also, I think it was Spotfire 10.5 or 10.6, the feature was introduced where you could just grab these and copy these. So if you're working with a lot of expressions and you're kind of going around your canvas, you don't always want to go into the settings and open up the whole dialog just to copy something. Know that you can click from this data tab, you can click this information tab, and you can copy directly from there. So that's a shortcut for you. And there's a lot of information that's automatically captured when you do transformations in the Spotfire canvas. This is showing it again per group, but if you want, you can actually pull everything for the whole data table by going to data and let's see, by going to, going to data and going to data table properties. So we're in this world provinces table, and I can go to source information, and this is every transform on every node and the whole thing. So I can just actually copy this to clipboard and store that if I want something that's more auditable for the future. There are some other things I'd like to talk about in just this view. We have here, you have something that says stored data. Now in Spotfire 7, you would see something where you would embed the data in analysis. This is now kind of referred to internally, at least, as a top embedding, where this option was used. Now with the data canvas, we don't recommend that you actually use this anymore. Instead, you can actually store the data, which I'll show a little bit later. But top embedding, what that does is it actually takes all of the different nodes, all the different sources, all the transformations, and it stores it as one final data table. Okay, one whole data table. And what that means is that you actually can't edit those sources later. So it will save memory in that if you're doing joins and you're doing filters and things like that, you might be excluding data, and that reduces the data size. But you lose the flexibility of going back and editing those things. So I'll show that a little bit later, but I want to show that this option was there. There are keyed columns. So this is when you want to replace certain values. So Spotfire needs to identify your rows by something unique. You may not have a unique identifier in your row. So you could give it a combination of columns to make a keyed column, such as in this I have I have different countries and I have dates. There's this COVID data. This is being measured once per day for different countries. So I could, in provinces, so a combination of date, province, and country, ISO 3 could be a keyed column that uniquely identifies each row. Those three columns uniquely identify each row. And that allows you to, when you're replacing data and then you reload data or new data comes in, Spotfire knows what rows should be replaced, what rows should be filtered out, things like that. So keyed columns are important. The other thing is filters. Sometimes people create, they bring data into Spotfire and the filters aren't there. I think this is the default behavior for external data, especially large external data. So you can tell Spotfire to create the filters automatically, or you can manage that manually here. Now, the other thing is show and user interface. So when I look at this DXP, there are a lot of tables in here. And once you start getting over 10 or 15 tables, it starts to become hard to find what you're looking for. There's a couple tips I have here. One, there's actually invisible search. So I put all of my final data tables that I really want to use in my visualizations. I put a prefix there, final. And if I just start typing in final, you can see that it did an invisible search where it filtered this down to just those tables. I have some things called prep, and this is a prep table, things like that. I have some things that are backup tables. Here are backup tables. So there are different kind of groupings I created, and you can just use invisible search to narrow that. Now, the other thing you can do is hide things. So I have a lookup table here, and I just use this to enrich one of my other flows here, bring this lookup table in, but I'm not really using that lookup table for any of my visualizations or data functions, and I'm kind of done, doing transformations on it. So what I can do is go to data table properties, and I can hide this. I can go, uncheck that, and then that lookup table disappears from the list. So that's a way you can start cleaning this up and help you in the authoring experience. Okay, so now I thought I would, let's see, what else do we want to talk about? Okay, so the other thing to talk about is calculated columns versus column transformations versus data function calculations. So when you have when you add a calculated column, when you go to data, add calculated column, you'll get this window in this expression editor. And what that's going to do is actually put the calculation on your last node. It's always going to be on your last node. Now you can do other stuff like you can add calculated columns and stuff as transformations on previous nodes, but those are column transformations. They're a little bit different. And one of the key differences is that calculated columns are dynamic. So if you're using document properties to create some sliders and create some dynamic what if scenarios, you're adjusting things and you want things to dynamically recalculate, well, then you want to do that as a calculated column, not as a column transformation. The column transformations, these only run when the data is loaded. So when the DXP first loads, or when you go to reload data, reload all data, reload linked data, that's the only time those will run. So if I have a slider on a document property or a property control, and I move that and I'm using that document property in an expression in one of these nodes, it's not going to do anything until I reload. So that's a key thing to, it actually gives you a lot of flexibility because you can start creating property controls as filters and treating them as filters. And that gives you things like drop downs and search areas, which are not in your typical filters. Checkboxes. So that's one thing where, using calculate columns might be beneficial in giving you some dynamicism there. Now, the other thing that goes on this final node are data functions that have a column output. So data functions can have a, they can have like table outputs, but in this one, I have an output that's going to be a set of columns that I want to append to this original data, and that's all coming here from the data function. So you'll see this in the information that is coming from the data function. So one thing I'm doing here, this analysis is, okay. So this is our COVID live report. You can access this by going to tibco.com/COVID-19. Let me see. So if I go down, let me go to my US counties. So what we have is we're actually calculating this smoother. And this is we talk about this in some quick tip videos. It's a bivariate regression method to give you a more accurate representation of these epidemic curves. Now, we're doing this on every single county over months and months of data. That can take some time. So one of the things that I have is I did some differencing. I actually did this last night, where I only want to calculate on, let's say, the last 3 months of data. So this county's data that's coming from my source, my Postgres database, I put a filter on here to only be the date greater than June 1st. All the previous data I've already pre-calculated, and so I don't want to have to recalculate that every day, every time I have new COVID-19 data coming in. So I have this whole workflow, and this goes through, and this does my data function, which is calculating these smooth values, these super smooth values, my curves. It's doing all my calculations, but I want to append my pre-calculated data to it. Now I can't append it before here because that would create duplicate columns. If I already had these columns in a pre-calculated table and I put that here, then this would just add new columns to it. So I needed to actually combine this separately. And the way I did that is another important point, which is the linked copy to data table analysis. So you can go to add, and then you can add a linked copy. I added the prep, and this will, you'll get this view. You can create this as a new data table. So this is just taking a copy of prep. You see that says 2 right there. And so now it's taken this whole workflow, and now I can add other stuff after it. So again, if I wanted to go to, let's see, where's prep? Here it is. If I wanted to add stuff after this data function, I can't really do that on this workflow because the data functions calculated columns are all going towards the end there. But by doing linked to the analysis, then I can now have a fresh workflow. Whatever is happening in that other workflow is going to be passed on down to here. So I went ahead and last night I created this final where I actually have this stored data through September. I filtered it up till the end of June, and then I just added rows. I appended this stuff that was coming from that prep flow. I appended it in, and so now I'm really only calculating on the past like 3 months or so, and that's saving me time. So this is how you start to link flows, and I think it is also a really important note. I see a lot of new users whenever they want to add data and they add, let's say just from a CSV. Okay, so they add data into the analysis and then they want to add it again and do some different stuff to it. They go back and they re-add the data all over again from the source. I think it's better to actually go to link the data. So if you have a good understanding, I'm going to try to, let's see if I can draw this here. If you have a good understanding of what flows that you're going to be building your data prep, you can bring in your source. Let's say you bring your CSV and that's your source. And then you can go and you can use this link copy to data table analysis to link to this and build a whole flow one way. And then you can kind of go and you can do that again and build another flow this way. And this way you're using the same source. It's only being loaded in here once, but then it's going downstream into totally different flows. So that's a way to kind of consolidate and not have to reload data over and over there. So let's see. Now, the other thing with calculated columns is you can't join on calculated columns because they're dynamic, and it can introduce some instability into your DXP. So instead, what you want to do is freeze those columns or use them as a column transformation. So if you had a column transformation, you can join on that, or you can go to your data table properties. You can go to, sorry, not data table properties. You can go to column properties, and you can go to a calculated column or a column coming from a data function, and you can freeze it. And that way it won't dynamically change and you can join to it. When I talked about top embedding and stuff, so the other option, so what you should be doing now instead of top embedding is actually using the stored data. This stores the data in the DXP. You can do new data when possible, which reaches out and tries to reload data if it has access to it. If not, it uses what's stored. And then always new data is a way that you're not storing any data in the DXP. You're just storing the visualizations, the representations, the metadata, essentially. This makes really small DXP sizes, but you can't send this to someone else and have them open it unless they have access to that data source. You can also reload directly here. Now, a key thing about this as well, this source node is, let me go back to my world provinces. What I did, is it world provinces, or maybe it's my counties? Yes, here. Okay. So you can add transformations all downstream of loading your data, but you can also go to your data source and add transformations directly on the source node. And that's beneficial because that actually runs when the DXP loads. So it's different than if this, for instance, is going to load after, this is going to run after the DXP has already loaded all of this data. So here you'll see I have a filter rows. Filter rows is going to reduce the amount of data being brought in, and I want to do that early on. I want this to run before the data is brought into Spotfire. I don't want to bring in millions of rows of data and then filter it down. I want it to do that filtering before it sends the data over. And so this runs directly on load. That's another way to boost the efficiency, reduce the file size of your DXP. All right, so let me do a couple other examples. So here I'm going to add some data. So I'm going to kind of go from scratch here for the next few minutes. I'm going to add some Postgres data. I have some COVID data on Azure, and I have Postgres stored on there. And I'm going to bring in my county data, and I'm going to bring in my world province data. I'm going to hit OK. Now here you have an option if you want to leave it external or you want to import it or do on demand. I'm going to import this, and while it loads, I'm going to explain what that means. So as I import this, this is sending all the data across the wire. It's loading it from the database. It's loading into Spotfire's memory. And this may take a little bit longer for analysis to load because it's putting all into Spotfire's memory, but you have full capabilities with all your transforms and data functions, things like that. Now, if you're just doing some basic reporting and you have like millions or billions of rows that you're trying to represent, you might want to use that external option. The external option doesn't load any data into Spotfire until it needs to. So I like to use an example with a bar chart. If you have a bar chart that's got 5 bars and it's showing the total sales in 5 different regions of the United States, and each of those bars have one value. So there's 5 different values that need to be brought in. Now the total sales might have a lot of individual line item sales. So there could be billions of rows that go into those 5 rows or those 5 values. So if you bring it all into memory, Spotfire is going to bring those billions of rows in, and then it's going to try to calculate the total sales for each of those 5 regions to get those 5 values. If you use it external and you don't import it, it's actually going to have the database do this. So if you have Snowflake or you have Redshift or whatever you're using, where you want BigQuery, you want your data source to be doing the work, then it will actually figure out what those 5 values are on the database sites and just send those 5 values over to Spotfire, which is a lot quicker. So here I have some counties and let's see, some regions. I'm going to do a transformation here where I'll filter it. This last updated is a string. Let me just make that into a date so I can do calculations on it. Date that's greater than, let's say, the date of August 1st, 2020. So this will reduce the data size. So that's a transformation that's done on the source right there. Let's say I want to change the column names. Here we go. So there's a lot of underscores in here. I'm going to just throw all of these in, and I'm going to do a substitute the column name, and I want to change an underscore to a space. So this is a quick way to rename and clean up all of your columns, all your column names at once. So if I do that, now there's a space across there. I don't like this lowercase. So now Spotfire doesn't have a proper case. So a tip that I had, you can find on, let's see here, this page of the, let's see, that's the wrong page. There's a regex expression that you can use, and this is from Sean Riley in our support team, and this can create a title case or a proper case. So let's see, brought all that over. So let me change column names, and I'm just going to put this expression in. I'm going to bring this over, and here I'm going to use the %C, which tells it to use the column name. And now you can see it's using this title case there. So that's a way to clean that up. The other thing I'm going to show, this last thing I'll probably be able to show because I am running out of time here. Let me see. I have a few more things, but I'm running out of time. One thing about a lot of this data is, so this is all not sorted, right? And that can be an issue if you want to use certain aggregations like last. So you can create a really simple data function, and you should store it in your library, but you can create a really simple data function that just orders the data. So here I have sort table by ascending, and this is the expression. So take the input data, I'm going to feed it all the columns. It's going to look for a column named date, and then it's going to put it in ascending order, and it's going to spit that out as an output. So if I go back to my other DXP here, you will see that here, sort table by ascending. And what you can do this with Python or R and Tear. You can have all the data prep code that you want that goes right into one of these nodes. So this is just a simple line that's just doing this data function that's sorting it by date. But you can have all of your, tidyverse, dplyr, you can know all your data prep into Python or R code, and you can put it right into your nodes on your data canvas. Now you need to store it in the library, because the way Spotfire works is it's loading up all of this data. It's loading up all these nodes, running all these transformations before it's doing the data functions and everything else that are in your typical kind of data function menus. So it needs to have access to this data function if it's going to run it as a transformation. So you have a data function transformation that's in your list. So in order for it to have access to it, you need to save that in the library. The last thing I'll show is a lookup table if you have a lot that you want to replace. So let me go to, let's see, Spain. So in my Spain data, like so. So here I have this data from all these world states, and let's see. You'll see that in Spain, these values are coming in. It's not the real states, the real provinces. There's also some things messed up in Germany. And I could individually write out what I want to replace all these by, but that can be a pain when you have so much to replace. So instead, I recommend creating a lookup table where you have something to join on, and you've identified what the values that you want to replace are and what you want to replace them with. And for this, you just go to here. You can, I'm going to add columns to this, and I'm going to browse for a local file. I'm going to take this Spain province data. And so this is just my table. It's a lookup table. I'm going to hit OK. And my settings for added columns, I'm going to join up country ISO 3 with this. I'm going to add my state code with region, which is region in my original data is just the province or state names. So I'm going to add this, and bring in the country, bring in the state here, and I'm just going to do a left single match join. The other thing is Spotfire actually, you can see that this scrolled here. When you have matched columns, Spotfire will automatically scroll this into view. That's another nice thing. And if you want to preview more, you can always change this. You want to preview more rows. So I'll hit OK here, and you'll see now that when I go down, let's see if we can find some Spain. Let's see. There's some. You can see, La Rioja over here is lined up with RI. And so if I want to replace this, what I can do is I can just add really simple transformations, calculate and replace column. I can say if the state column is null, then use region, which is whatever it's, Sheffield here will go in there. Otherwise, use what's in the state column. So if I hit and I want to replace the state column here, I'll hit OK and OK. So now I have all this states in. So that's cleaned up right there. I can also exclude the original if I want. So I can exclude region. Say I want to exclude country or whatever. So now I have this clean column with the values all replaced there. And this is useful because if I want to add more replacements, you saw that the Germany names were messed up. There's probably some in other countries that are messed up. I can just add them here into this spreadsheet. It's really easy. I can just keep adding them into this lookup table. And then all I have to do is refresh this and it'll do the replacement across all of these values. So I don't have to like type these out as an expression to replace everything. You know, another way to type it out is, as I showed earlier, is an expression like this, which can be kind of cumbersome.